Welcome, everybody, to the Living Like Jesus podcast, where we are trying to learn to live like Jesus lived so that we can do what Jesus did. We want to welcome you in. If you haven't already subscribed or hit the like button, please make sure you do that before the episode's over. So let me introduce who's with me today. As always, John Louviere, who is Connections Pastor at First Bluff.
Yeah. Hey, everybody.
So, and then this month we have on the next two episodes with us, Lindsey Hebert.
Hello.
Yes, mom, member at First Bluff.
I don't want to say anything, but the last time Lindsey was on the episode, Eric, her husband, was with her.
Yes.
And I'm not saying that there's any reason for this. I don't want to read into it. I guess the audience can read into it for themselves. Eric's not here this time. Okay. I just want to point that out.
That's
just
not
point
nice.
that out. Eric, we love you if you watch. So, yeah, perfect. All right, so this week...
He'll be on the next one.
Yeah. This month, we're talking about Sabbath. And so let's just start here before we launch into the biblical things that we want to talk about today. So when you hear the word Sabbath, what comes to mind?
Honestly, so that has changed over the last few months, but it used to be kind of dread.
Okay.
I had a bad theology of Sabbath in the past where I thought I just was supposed to sit at my house and stare at the wall all day and not do anything and that sort of thing. And so I used to hear people say, I'm taking a Sabbath, and I would be like, you're just looking for an excuse to be lazy and do nothing, sort of thing. And so these days, though, when I hear the word Sabbath, I think about rest. I think about rejuvenation, renewal, that sort of thing. So it has changed.
Good. All right.
Yeah. I'm still not great at it. It's a work in progress.
It is. Yeah.
How about you?
It's the same for me. Up until about a month or so ago, you did a teaching on it, and I kind of started looking a little bit more into it. And originally, or before, I thought it was like this impossible thing to accomplish because it's just, especially different seasons of life, being a mom, and just other things outside of just the day-to-day things. It's just things that get added on. So it's like, this is an impossible mark to meet.
Yeah.
And, but now it kind of feels more like a gift, looking at it from the way that God intended it to be for us. And I think it's really beautiful the way that he has planned this out and given us just like the permission, you know?
There you go. That's
and,
good.
Yeah. And so, it looks different for me, and looking into it, it whenever it says specifically about, ceasing your work or to not do work, looking into it, it actually meant more about like occupational work, and it says about public service. And so it just kind of redefined it more for me. It wasn't necessarily that I had to sit on the couch and do nothing.
Yeah, right.
You have to sit on the couch and I can't even do anything with my hands.
Yeah.
So
I have to sit Indian style and meditate, and I can't even sit Indian style. So that's a problem.
Yeah, or like you said, it's like, what am I supposed to do all day? Or the idea is like, how can you just do nothing all day?
Yeah.
What does that even look like or
Or
mean?
whose life can even take a day like that?
Exactly.
Life is so busy. Like, who can take a whole day
now,
and do nothing?
and we will talk about that. You do have to make adjustments to bring Sabbath into your life. We'll talk about that next episode. So this episode, what we're going to look at primarily is sort of the biblical basis of it. Answer the question, should Christians even worry about this, think about this? Should this be something that's a part of our natural rhythm today, or is this just an Old Testament thing that some people are trying to bring in to the gospel and that kind of thing? So let's start with understanding the biblical background of the Sabbath, just sort of lay the foundation and the groundwork. So the first place it shows up, of course, is in Genesis chapter 2, verses 2 and 3. Let me read those. It says, on the seventh day, God finished his work that he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work that he had done. So God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it God rested from all his work that he had done in creation. So in those two verses, it's very clear that the Sabbath includes rest and resting from all the work. So just like what you're talking about a minute ago, Lindsey, it's rest from work. So that's immediately what you see there, because it just repeated over and over and over again. And then you move forward and you get to the 10 Commandments, and God commands the nation of Israel that they are to take a rest, take a Sabbath, because God did. and he ties it to his rhythm and his, God ties it to his rhythm and what he did in creation and what we see in creation. And then you move forward, and it's again, in Deuteronomy, it's a reminder of a deliverance from Egypt, and it's a remembrance of that. So you see this sort of, first of all, the creation story. It seems like God establishes this rhythm of like every 7 days there's like a renewal, and God puts this sort of picture throughout creation of this rest and renewal period. So we see it every day. There's night, so the sun goes down, sun comes up. There's sort of a renewal there. We've got our 4 seasons that we go through an entire cycle with that. There just seems to be in the pattern of God's creation this idea that things are to rest and then to live from that rest, to come back from that rest. And ultimately, when you begin to study the Sabbath, that's what we begin to see is that God didn't intend for us to rest from our work, but to work from our rest. Yeah, and there's a big difference there. Where God never intended for us to say, if I could just make it to my next vacation, then I'll be okay. Once I get that next 7 days off, then maybe I'll recuperate a little bit. Instead, that's no way to live. That's just surviving. That's not life in abundance as Jesus promised us. So God has something much more enjoyable, joy-filled for us in mind to live, and that is to learn to work out of a rest that he is supposed to give us. So when it comes to the idea of what does the Bible say about Christians following the Sabbath, should we do it? Let's kind of dive into that a little bit. What did you maybe used to think? Because obviously y'all kind of think differently now.
Yeah.
What did you used to think about? Should Christians even worry about this, pay attention to this at all?
Yeah, 100%, because of his direction for us to, and you see it not only in the Old Testament, but also in the New Testament. He talks about him being our rest. And so I think as far as being a follower of Christ and being a follower of his way, that the only way that we can get healthy spiritual growth is through rest. And that is through, in a way, I kind of look at it as bought time. I accomplish what I need to in expectation that I have this bought time carved out that I'm going to rest.
Yeah.
And I think it's pretty neat too, the way that the verse that you read in Genesis about how he rested. God wasn't tired.
Right.
He wasn't exhausted. And so it's not even so much from like a physical tiredness, but just our work's completed, and now it's time for us to rest, celebrate what we accomplished, and kind of just refuel. But honestly, being me and my humanness, if that's a word. Is that a word?
That's a word. We're going to roll with it today.
Me and my humanness.
It's there.
It twice. It's a word.
The
reality is I am tired, and I physically and mentally. And so to not take advantage of the rest that he prescribes is kind of a little silly.
Yeah, for sure. So I make sure that I carve it out in different ways.
Okay.
I think it's interesting you say that, like to think that we're somehow going to go against how this is all designed,
right?
By God, and
we're just going to keep pushing
think
through.
We're going to be okay. I think that's probably how I would have said that I used to think about it, like it was an option. If it fits into my schedule,
yes,
I'll make it work, and if it doesn't, I'll just keep going on with life. And what I've noticed over the years of doing that is I've always called it hitting a wall, and I kind of wore that almost as a badge of honor. Like I'm going to push until I can't push anymore. And the Lord like sits me down for a while. I get sick or, I just get so tired that I can't, do anything else and that sort of thing. And so, you mentioned like the pattern that we think with vacations is like work, rest, work, rest. But when we were going through this as a church, I remember us looking at this graphic, and maybe we can put these graphics in the show notes, that the world's pattern of this is that vacation pattern where you just work until you get to, go to the beach for a week, and then you come back to work so that you can go to the beach for a week. But God's pattern is work, rest, work, rest. And you had mentioned, I think it's a really important thing. Like, and I think this is what kind of clicked in my head, is that our work is what our work comes out of our rest, not the other way around.
Right.
And so I think changing that perspective in my mind has really got me to think like, okay, if like the foundational pieces rest, well, then I got to reevaluate everything and how I'm looking at all of it.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, that graphic you're talking about is from Emotionally Healthy Leadership by Pete Scazzaro. So, and that was really transformative for us as a staff and as a church, because it began to shift, because we were running wide open nonstop.
Yes.
And all of a sudden, all of us, at least for me, it's like a sense, this permission, like y'all said, to, yes, I work, but then you're supposed to stop. And there's this rhythm there of you can keep pushing, and it's it reminds me, the people of Israel were supposed to give the land rest every 7 years. Well, they didn't do it. Yeah. And then ultimately God takes them out of the land for 70 years for all of the times that they didn't give it rest. So it's kind of like what you're talking about there, of like God's going to shut you down.
That's right. Yes.
Maybe because you've got to rest. Like, we're just not created to go nonstop.
Yeah.
No matter how much resilience some people think they are. And Hebrews 4 speaks to this, that there is a rest for the people of God. And particularly in the gospel, that we should be people who live from rest. First of all, resting in Christ, and then living outside of that in our identity and in our calling and in our purposes that God has given to us. That's the place where we start. So ultimately, what would you say to someone who comes to you and says, hey, look, I get that you appreciate Sabbath, but listen, it's not something that I think I need to do. Yeah. And again, it's commanded, but that's in the Old Testament. Like, I don't see it commanded in the New Testament.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So, and we're New Testament people. So what would be your encouragement to them if they came to you and said, I just don't think this is for me?
Well, gosh, there's a book that was recommended to me, and I think it's called Practicing the Way. And one of the opening pages, it says that if you're not intentionally following Jesus, then you're unintentionally following something or someone else.
Wow.
Living like Jesus can seem impossible at times. So we've created a free guide for you. Just go to the link in the description and you'll get a free guide to help you take your next steps in living like Jesus. Also, while you're down there, don't forget to like and subscribe.
Right.
And so I get because I've had it too, and I'm not saying that I'm even great with finding rest. It's still something that I have to kind of refocus and be intentional with whenever I find myself being unintentional. But I do encourage the practice of being intentional and finding rest with Jesus. And that looks different from different people. How that looks for you is going to look different for me. How that looks for my husband looks completely different for me. And so I think that everybody thinks of this. Well, I personally have thought that it had to be this perfect recipe and had to look this certain way, but really it's just about your mind focus. And so encouraging somebody who doesn't feel the need for that, it's just having them take a look at where their thoughts go. And if they find it more on like a negative, bitter side, then that is your inner self telling you, I need the rest. I need the rest.
Yeah. One of the things I thought about, we've been talking a lot about this here lately, of like, there's more. And I think when we don't do this, or when we don't think we need it, I think we're getting caught in the trap of settling for less than what God has for us. And that's what I found myself doing. And I know that that's probably a place where a lot of people find themselves. And so my encouragement is, that is a pattern that you've been doing in your life. And maybe your life, I'm not saying your life is terrible. I'm not saying, I'm saying that there is more, though.
You're right.
And there is a different way of doing this that could be better.
Yes.
Because, we can, man can make his own plans, but the plans of the Lord are what is perfect. And that's what we have to do. That's what we have to pursue, is that perfect plan. And, he built this into creation. He built this into, how arrogant of us to think that we're not part of that.
Yeah.
He built this into each one of us. And so if we are looking for the more that God is offering us, following his direction on this, I think is something that we ought to pursue and we ought to look towards, because there is more for us in this.
Yeah.
And I know we're going to talk about a lot more about that in the next episode.
Sure, yeah.
But that's kind of the building block of it. There's more.
Yeah, and I just want to add to that too. Like, I think that, like, for myself, I didn't realize the type of blinders I had on.
100%.
That I was blocking myself from experiencing the more. And even recently, there was a change that happened to how our Sundays look. And I was resistant. Like, I had some serious prayer time about it. And then I found myself moving forward and adjusting to the change. And I can't, like, this past Sunday was my first Sunday, and I probably will get emotional about it, but it was so good for my spirit. Like, what I was trying to block ended up being so much good for me and for my family. And it was just such a sweet thing to realize. And so I feel like when we block ourselves off from considering a different way to do things, we're blocking ourselves from the more. Good. You know,
absolutely.
It's such a sweet thing.
It is.
And I don't know. I love how it works.
Yeah, absolutely. It's amazing that when we live life the way God asks us to live, how things go. It's just he kind of is like, oh man, I think he knows what he's doing.
Yeah. He may have this if we just let him.
Yeah. Like, he probably understands me better than I understand me, and so I'm gonna surrender there. And
none of us would ever like say, God, I'm not following you.
Yes.
It's much more subtle than that.
Sure, yeah.
You know, like, God, I understand what you're saying, but this is good too.
Yes.
This can work.
Right? Or, that's for another season of life. This season of life.
Man, we do that a lot, right? We call it seasons.
You mentioned parenthood.
Yes.
You know, we all three of us have kids of various ages, you know, and it is parenthood. It's like, how am I supposed to Sabbath when they got to be at 4 different baseball games on Saturday? Well, you're gonna have to make some sacrifices, and we're going to talk a lot about that in the next episode. Yes, to Sabbath, you have to make life changes. You just have to.
You have to. Yes.
But that's the problem, is we give into this idea that life has to be this way, of constantly going, constantly moving. When you look at your calendar, you're stressed out because there's no empty space whatsoever. There's no margin. There's no room to breathe. You're constantly going. And to be honest, our kids are stressed out too, because we're stressed out, and we're constantly moving them. They're constantly moving around. And that's just, like you said, there's just so much more that God wants for us.
Yes.
Than just this constant frenetic pace of life that really, in all honesty, when does he get considered in all of that?
Well, and y'all mentioned on the last episode about trusting the teacher. I loved the context of all of that. And if you truly trust him as a teacher, you have to expect interruptions and be open to his interruptions. Because if you have somebody that's a master at something, you want that. Because I just think about, like, my dad showing me something whenever I was younger, and then he would leave, and then he'd come back and check my work, and he would offer encouragement, but he would also offer, like, hey, this is good, but right here you need to adjust this.
Yes. Yeah.
And so to not, and like him being my dad, and just like Jesus as our father, like, we have to accept, or we have to be willing to accept those interruptions and allow him just to kind of tweak things and not close off, because that's what creates our blind spots.
That's probably, when we think about it, our desire to be the controllers of our own life is probably, you know, we talked a little while ago about what gets in the way of a Christian really buying into this. That's probably, if we drill down to the root and we were really honest, that's probably what it is. We want to be in control. We want to have our say. Yeah. You know, and we don't want that correction.
And the good news in that is, if we see the goodness of the Lord, it's actually good news that we're not in control.
Oh gosh.
It's just great news that we're not.
We have tons of evidence of that. Yeah.
Yes.
And I think I read one time that the Sabbath, speaking of control, the Sabbath is an intentional 24-hour period where I acknowledge, God, you're running the world, I'm not.
That's right.
And that's
you are God and I am not. And I'm okay with that.
And when I stop and rest and celebrate and delight and worship, the world keeps moving.
Yeah, and I think that's the fear, is that, well, things are going to fall apart.
Yep.
And
or we're going to get behind.
Yeah,
going to get behind.
It's never the case.
Yeah,
No.
we're going to get behind. So, well, hey, we've just laid the foundation in this episode. So, and it's been a good foundation of understanding. Even, yes, this shows up first in the Old Testament, but again, it shows up first in creation. So it's a natural part of the rhythm that God has given his world and he's given to us. And so it's not limited to an Old Testament idea. And we're all convicted that Christians should practice Sabbath, that it should be a natural rhythm, that every 7 days you should have a 24-hour period where you stop, you rest, you delight, you worship, which we're going to talk about how you do that in the next episode. So that's just a conviction of ours. That's part of, we believe that Jesus lived that way. And again, that's what we're striving to do, is we want to live like Jesus lived so that we could do the things that Jesus did. And Jesus was a master at Sabbath. It says often in the scripture, it says he gets away often. And I can imagine he, at least every 7 days, he got away, probably even more so in between that, because he knew that he had to be with the Father in order to do that. So some great things were said today about, that it's working from our rest. Yeah. And man, I appreciate, laying this foundation that the Sabbath needs to be a part of our natural rhythm of life, that our weekly rhythm of our lives. So next episode, we're going to get more into the details of how you actually, so let's say, what do you do? Like,
all right,
do
cool.
you just,
I'm going to do it, but what do I do?
You just stare at the wall?
Yeah, exactly.
You got to stare at the wall for 24 hours.
You've convinced me. Okay, what?
Yes, got you. What am I supposed to do now? So no, you don't just stare at the wall. There's actually some very wonderful practices that you put into place to enjoy the Sabbath. So, but that's next episode. So thank you for tuning in to this episode of Living Like Jesus, where we strive to live like Jesus lived so that we can do what Jesus did. Make sure you hit that like and subscribe button before you head out, and we'll see you next time. So living like Jesus isn't something that comes naturally to us. And so we all need help in doing that. So we've created a free guide to help you out. Just click on the link in the description for you to take your next steps to live like Jesus.